For more on what was achieved at COP27 and what was not, let's speak with Professor Mark Howden, Director of the Institute for Climate, Energy and Disaster Solutions at the Australian National University. And he joins us today from Canberra. Good day, Professor. The landmark deal for a loss and damage fund to help vulnerable countries, clearly the biggest achievement of this summit. Would you say that COP27 was a success because of it?
Look, I think it is a big achievement and it is a major win for developing countries who are rightly concerned about climate change. But at the same time, there was actually backslipping on some of the things which were established at Glasgow. So at best, I think it's called a mixed result.
And when it comes to the fund itself, as always, the devil will be in the details. Do we know how it will work, when it will actually start, and when it's expected to start having an impact?
No. So we saw essentially a statement of intent and some steps towards implementation. So setting up the committees and the governance arrangements around that. But the details have yet to be worked out, and even very basic details about what are the principles in terms of allocation of the funds didn't get covered. And so at the moment, it's a good statement of intent, but we need to see a lot more, and I think that will take quite a while to negotiate.
There was a significant presence of oil industry representatives at COP27. Many African nations even promoting their new oil and gas initiatives. And we're seeing reports of some negotiators being brought to near tears that more was not done. Are we ever going to see the end of fossil fuels? And how troubling is it that no significant progress was made on that front?
Well, not only was no significant progress made, but I would argue that we actually went backwards from the position in Glasgow. So in Glasgow, for example, there was the text included a phase out of coal, whereas that was weakened to include a phase down of unabated coal. So that's coal which doesn't have offsets associated with it or carbon capture and storage. And similarly, in terms of fossil fuel subsidies, the statement about phasing out of fossil fuel subsidies was changed to phasing out of inefficient fossil fuel subsidies without any assessment of what does constitute efficient or inefficient subsidies. And those are huge loopholes for fossil fuel producing countries and industries to actually walk through. So in many ways, we actually went backwards from Glasgow.
And the US and China made statements about working together. The climate crisis is a global issue, but how important is it that the two biggest carbon emitters are talking again?
Look, I think it's very important not only for climate change, but for a whole range of reasons. And I think having constructive dialogues about something that they can agree on is perhaps a good entree to a broader set of discussions. And so I think that's a very positive step forwards, being the two single biggest emitters. What matters in China, what happens in USA in terms of greenhouse gas emissions really does count.
For the first time, the voices of refugees and those displaced by climate crises were heard at COP. Do you think they played a large enough role at the negotiating table? And do you think financing from that loss and damage fund will reach them?
Well, I think there was a stronger voice, from a range of countries, particularly developing countries had a strong voice at the COP. But at the same time is that we saw restrictions in terms of protests and sort of activist events of different types, and that restricted that voice of marginalised or other people. So again, I think it's a mixed record. One of the particularly disappointing things was the prices to get to the conference of parties and the accommodation costs at the conference of parties were exorbitant, and that restricted the attendance of a lot of people from Africa, and it was supposed to be Africa's COP, and also from other groups such as non-government organisations and youth activists. So that was not great because those voices, I think, are particularly important to be heard.
Now, a lot of talk always sort of surrounds COP27, but it's the action that will really sort of make the difference. What will you be looking out for signs that COP27 has done some good things?
Look, Stephen, I think it's really important that we actually see progress in terms of implementation. So, for example, when we look at the sort of extreme events that are happening right around the world and other climate changes, it's really obvious that we need to be adapting to climate change much more quickly than we currently are. And that's what the recent Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change found, that we need to be adapting quicker because there's a big gap growing between what we need to be doing and what we are doing. But once again, that particular set of actions was kicked down the road. So it was essentially put off till next year and a series of discussions next year. So I would love to see a lot more action on emission reduction, so concrete steps to reduce emissions. So instead of going up, our global emissions start to come down. Concrete steps and action in terms of adaptation and also reinvigoration of the finance going into the climate finance buckets, including through the new loss and damage fund. So I think action speaks louder than words in most circumstances, and particularly in this one.
Certainly does. Thanks so much for your time this morning. Professor Mark Howden there, Director, Institute for Climate, Energy and Disaster Solutions at ANU. Thanks for joining us.